it time? Let's do it. Are we broadcasting? Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Every spiritual teaching you've ever heard, all spiritual discussion you've ever heard, every spiritual book you've ever read, is entirely wrong. Completely inaccurate. This is because this condition that obtains here, what's actually happening here, is entirely and completely undescribable. It cannot be described in words. It cannot be described rationally. It cannot be addressed even semi-accurately with human symbols. So as a result, all of these spiritual teachings are entirely misleading if they're taken at their face value, if they're taken at their superficial logical content, at their given semantic value. At best, all of these teachings can serve as a trick to enable you, in the course of grappling with them, to stumble onto that which is actually the case, which of course is completely available, because what is the case is the case. It's right here. What this condition actually is, it is, you are it, you are completely engaged in it, so there is availability, there is a direct connection. But we are typically so inundated in erroneous information, we are so inundated in various philosophies and implied philosophies and implied worldviews, that we more or less accept some degree of some of it, most typically. And in so doing, we are cut off from being able to appreciate what is here, because what is here departs so completely, so totally, so absolutely fundamentally from anything that is expressible in human terms. So we're left with the interesting condition that all this spiritual teaching, which is intended, of course, to try to convey some of our condition in a useful way, most typically just completely confuses people, because if you take any of it at face value, you are being led, up the primrose path. You are being led into something that is completely inaccurate, completely untrue. This confusion and misunderstanding is most fundamentally engaged typically by the fact that we incorporate into our idea of what we are and how we work and the way we are even perceiving, we incorporate these erroneous ideas into that mode. So we tend to be approaching our very experience from an already incorporated wrong view. So we aren't starting from neutrality, we're starting from error, and we already assume we are the error, and we assume the way we're looking at our experience is in accordance with this erroneous understanding. So looking from the context of that confusion, there's no way that the actuality can be discovered unless we have the good/bad fortune or luck or grace or whatever to find ourselves somehow catapulted outside of that context, outside of the way we ordinarily hold ourselves to be and what we ordinarily hold our experience to be, to discover the naked fact of what this is, which is so astounding, so completely inconceivable, that it has never been expressed, even remotely accurately. Even hints at it are so wide of the mark. So, in practical terms, in terms of spiritual practice, in terms of in that case, what do you do? How do you work with this? How do you try and approach this? Your greatest opportunity is to, by hook or by crook, find yourself outside of your ordinary frame of reference. This can happen through extreme disorientation. This can happen through extreme fright or startlement. This can happen through various kinds of extreme behavior that precipitate us unexpectedly into a new and radically different perspective. This can happen through happen chance, through just slipping through the cracks. I'm sure that we've all heard the famous story of the Zen monk who was raking up the leaves and his rake hit a rock and bang, just that impact did the trick. Why? Well, there's no why. That's the point. There is no why. There's no logic to it. There's no rationality to it. There's no explanation. There's no justification. But somehow he found himself outside of his normal context of what he holds himself to be unconsciously and what he holds this to be, and he was able to see it. And it's not hard to see. It's completely easy to see, in fact, because we're all completely immersed in it all the time. But we're also typically completely immersed in our worldview and our sense of ourselves. And this is usually the case unconsciously, so we aren't aware that this is a relatively contrived stance that we're holding, that we take to be objectively true. So we find ourselves thinking we are neutral, thinking we are clear, thinking we are in a state of objectivity where we're completely caught up, most typically, in holding ourselves to be profoundly other than we are, and holding this situation here to be profoundly other than it is. But of course, our good fortune is this situation is not actually other than it is. It actually is what it is. So reality is always right here. Our actual condition, our actual situation is completely nakedly displayed, is always available. What you are and what this is always completely accessible, completely unclouded, completely unblocked, completely clear. So of course at any moment you can find yourself outside your accustomed frame of reference, and in that instant what this is will be clearly seen. And of course, in accordance with my original statements tonight, even these words are not true. Because the truth cannot be said. It cannot be accurately put. We can have a discussion if you'd like to. If you'd like to speak, there's a microphone you can speak into. Not that we necessarily need one in this little room, but there are people following along with this discussion online who would be interested to hear what you have to say.
Hi. So you mentioned all you have to do is find yourself outside your normal frame of reference. Would you want to talk about how a person goes about doing that? Just to say
by hook or by crook. How you go about doing that is any way that you can. the symptoms of finding yourself outside of your frame of reference is you won't be able to say what anything is. You won't be able to think what anything is. You won't be able to think what you are. You'll find yourself being in experience, but you won't be able to know anything precise about it. Anytime you think you know anything about anything, or know what anything is, or know what's happening to any degree whatsoever, is a sure sign that you are in confusion, that you are wrong, that you are in a frame of reference which exists only in your imagination and which is not actually obtained. So any kind of experience or functioning which places you in a condition of relative unknowing is a potential a potential point of easier access to noticing this actual condition. And of course, typically, at first it'll be very disorienting because it is so radically different from the normal human worldview. Very often people stumble onto this and they find it very uncomfortable, or they get very nervous, or they go a little crazy, or they get very fearful. This is very common because what this is so strange in comparison to the normal human worldview.
So that sounds a little like the negative side of not knowing what something is. If a person doesn't know, what would they be doing instead? What is it that they would be going to?
You can't tell until you find it, because it's not anything that is describable or designatable. It is not, as you well put it, it's not a negativity. It's actually a positivity. It's not nothing. It's very much something. But what that something is cannot be said. So to try and get an idea of, well, what should I go towards, is self-defeating. It's intrinsically, go away from anything you know, and when you find yourself not knowing anything, it won't be nothing. So it is something, and look at what that something is, that you can't say what it is, and you will see what it is, and then you'll know what it is. You won't be able to say what it is, of course, but that's not the point, is it? The point isn't to be glib and erudite and write books, although, of course, a lot of people seem to do that. The point is to know it, because knowing what this is, knowing what you are, has some rather interesting implications.
One of those implications seems to be aloneness.
Seems to be which?
Aloneness.
Yes, you discover that you are the sole inhabitant of your entire universe, which is a rather interesting result and rather counterintuitive in terms of the normal human worldview. And at first this can be startling and even threatening, but of course it turns out not to be a problem. It turns out to be rather a delightful state of affairs, in fact. And it's not what one might think. One might think, oh, if you're alone in your universe, then that would be awfully lonely. But it's not lonely, because it's not an aloneness of lack. It's not like there's something that could be present that you don't have access to, that you're being cut off from. On the contrary, you have absolute intimate engagement with everything and anything, but none of it is other than what you are, so there's no other. There's no actual other there. There's no actual other or others or anything along those lines, which turns out to be rather nice in many ways, especially for those of us who have sociopathic inclinations. I could make a list of a lot of the qualities that you will discover when you discover what this is, but I'm loath to do so, even though I do it all the time and people do it all the time. I'm loath to do so because it's ultimately misleading to do so, because the actuality is always different than the way it's put. It cannot be otherwise, because the actual condition cannot be put into words. It simply can't be done. It's an impossibility. It's not a matter of not being clever enough or not having a large enough vocabulary or a strong enough command of the language. It cannot be done. It cannot be captured. It's an impossibility. But it doesn't need to be captured, because you have the whole thing. You have the actuality immediately present. You have the fullness. So you don't need a model of it. You don't need a version of it. You don't need a description of it. You have the real thing, and you can look at it for yourself and let it show you what it is. In fact, you are looking at it. You've never seen anything else, because illusion does not exist. Anything that is present is reality. But it is not what you think it is. It cannot be what you think it is, because thought cannot capture it. Thought cannot accurately reflect it. So see without thought. Surprisingly easy to do. We do it typically every night when we're falling asleep. We do it when we get distracted or startled suddenly. You hear a sudden loud noise. There's an instant where you're not thinking. Or if you ever gotten very intoxicated, you might, or very high on drugs or something, you might have found yourself in some kind of a non-thought condition. Or all the time we find ourselves just sort of in between our thoughts, or in between we're thinking of this and then we start thinking of that, and there's a little moment in there where it's not anything in particular. And that's very interesting. That not anything particular is a very interesting place to look. Because when you're not holding this to be anything, then you can potentially see what it is. But we're so good at holding it to be something. And we usually, of course, aren't doing it intentionally, aren't doing it deliberately or consciously, so we don't even know we're doing it. We just think, well, that's the way things are. This is how it is. This is objectively true. This is real. And this is real, but our thoughts and ideas about what it is are wholly wrong. Even when we're in the midst of thought, we're in non-thought experience. And this becomes really obvious. If you go to a museum, say, and you see a striking work of art, what is it about it that makes it striking? It's not a thought or a word. There's some intangible presence, some flavor, some quality that you can't possibly capture accurately in words, that is present, that is moving. And well, this is a clear example of presence that is beyond thought. Or say you see a gorgeous sunset and you just look at it and you go, wow. And of course you can think, oh, this is a sunset, and you can think a lot about it, but at the same time you're very directly aware of a presence that transcends thought, that transcends analysis. The beauty of a sunset, of a gorgeous sunset, is undeniable, but it's not logical. It's not conceptual. It's not an argument. It's not a thesis. It's simply a present fact. It's an irrational present fact that is what it is, and uncapturably so in words or ideas. I mean, how many poems can you read about sunsets? Do any of them look like a sunset? I don't think so. So we have constant access to these kinds of experiences, every moment of our waking life, if we have the wit, intelligence, luck, or grace to appreciate them, to notice them, to look the other way from where we're usually obsessively looking in our storylines and our arguments and our narrative, and notice that there's always, present something else. There's always present just astounding qualities which are completely ungraspable, completely inconceivable, completely undescribable. You see a beautiful face. That's not logical. I mean, you can say, oh, I just saw a beautiful face. But saying that sentence is not the beautiful face. The beautiful face is an actual present reality that completely transcends logic. It transcends conceptualization. It's not beautiful because you're thinking about it or you have clever words about it. It's beautiful because it's just plain a presence of beauty. And what can you say about beauty? It's a mystery. Mystery is simply a synonym for you cannot describe it. You cannot get your head around it rationally. So we have constant access to this kind of experience if we allow ourselves to appreciate it, if we allow ourselves to notice what it is and what is there. We can find ourselves in this inherently transcendent condition that inherently transcends the human worldview in every regard.
Does it help to be aware of larger and larger context of which experience seems to could collectively be considered? So in other words, instead of looking at things and what happens and what you don't know and not, you instead look at the process or the how you find yourself in, say, experience, where it's you look at the context of what everything is seemingly in.
Sure. And any of these kinds of tricks can work if they do, but they can also not work depending upon how artfully you are with them and the degree to which they become departures for you rather than just plodding along within your view of things. In other words, anything can help if it helps, which is kind of a useless suggestion.
Looking at the broader context of what your experience seems to be.
It might, if you can transcend the idea that it's a broader context. If you think of it as a broader context, it'll be useless. And again, you can't know whether or not you will be able to find yourself in that transcendence until you do, or don't.
So then there's the experience of tapping into the seeming feeling of energy or awareness of energy.
Sure. But if you're thinking of it, but if it seems to be energy, then you're stuck again. You can't make a list of this is a possibility and this isn't, because anything is a possibility if you are with it as the transcendental presence that it actually consists of. But if you find yourself being with it as something, even something very sophisticated, you're still you're not letting yourself be with the event nakedly. You're being with it the way that you're subtly holding it to be. So it's very tricky. In other words, you have to find yourself doing it. It's not about technique. It's not about look at this, you'll have better luck than it will looking at that. It's about how do you get out of your own way, and that is, there's no simple answer for that because it's ultimately unique. But it will also be surprising. Surprise yourself. The best way to get out of your own way is surprise yourself. Well, how do you do that? If you set about to deliberately surprise yourself, it's not going to be very surprising. So it can be tricky. Yeah.
to learn to get out of my way when I'm speaking in satsang, because when I'm listening, there's an absorption in it. It seems that there's so much beauty. The words are so clear. It's like and everything that there's just so much beauty. It's but then when I start to think and try to talk about, I want to participate, I want to say something, but see, here I'm in my way now. It's not the same,
Right. The trick is ignore the words and stay with the actual object the actual quality you're talking about.
See, when I'm listening to you, I don't even know what you said. It's just
I don't know what I said either. That's
just
the trick.
it's like, it's just beauty.
Yeah, but that's because when I'm talking, I'm with beauty, and I'm basically don't even know that I'm talking. I'm just describing. It's like if I asked you to tell me what's outside that window, you wouldn't need to sit here and go, let's see. I think you just look and say, well, I see a tree, I see a street light, I see leaves, I see darkness, I see windows. You don't need to think about it because you're not with the words. You're with the object that you're focused on. And the words just follow without thought. So let the object talk. Don't think you have to translate it into your. When I say the object, I mean the reality, the present reality that you are referring to, right? The inspiration or whatever it is. Obviously, we can't, as we've established or as I've asserted. It can't be put into words. So,
but
anyway, this astounding presence. Be with that presence, and then let it talk, and then words will come that will reflect it or embody it to the extent they can. But if you think you need to translate it into thought and then speak the thought, you're more liable to trip over yourself.
That's how I always get caught, because I'm always trying to think about what's going on, and then to have a way to talk about that, and it just does not translate. It's more like being in love. It's like like being deeply, passionately in love with every single thing that's getting engaged. Yeah,
and that's
everything,
it. That's it. You don't think about it. You just are engaged with the presence, and then the words are just that engagement coming out in words, not without an intermediate step of thinking.
I just always just feel speechless, other than to just go, wow.
But speechless is good. Speechless is very good, because that's the clearest expression of that which can't be said, is to not say anything.
But then when you speak, it's somehow it's touching something that's so true, and it's like the truth has such power. It has such force. It's just it's so beautiful. It's so
the truth has power and force. So stay with truth, and then if talking comes, that's good, and if it doesn't come, that's good. But truth is all that matters.
So in satsang, other than listening for me is really powerful. I hear.
Don't think in terms of listening. Don't think in terms of talking. Think in terms of seeing. If you're seeing truth, that's all that matters, and it doesn't matter whether you think of yourself as listening or talking. And then sometimes listening will happen, and sometimes talking will happen, but it's the seeing that matters. That's the only thing that matters, right? So if you're seeing, that's a home run. And then there may or may not be talking, there may or may not be listening, but that's, who cares at that point? What difference does it make? Right?
I'm grateful to be able to listen to.
Well, you're grateful to be able to see. That's the greatest gift any of us can have, is just to recognize, to be able to see this astoundingness. And that fact is the ultimate beauty. That's the height of human achievement, is to be able to see what we are, to be able to see this profundity. So it's grace, it's a blessing.
Thank you.
Another of the implications seems to be purposelessness. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, in what is happening is so completely beyond the realm of human ideas that, of course, ideas of purpose, which suppose that there's functioning, there's goals to be achieved, there's something happening here that is something moving towards something. All of these notions don't actually apply. So all the normal human ideas of purposefulness or of purpose or of a goal or of achievement or of any kind of growth or fulfillment turn out to be completely not applicable to what this actual condition is, what this actual event is. On the other hand, what this event is nothing but purpose, but it's a non-linear, non-human purpose that is completely ungraspable in any kind of logical terms, or in any kind of ideas, or in anything that makes any sense whatsoever. Which translates, in human terms it'll look exactly like purposelessness, even though it is the very essence of purpose. It is a purposefulness that is inconceivable. Every single flash of light that has ever appeared in your experience is precisely how it is, with absolute precision. There's no accidents. There is no chaos. There is no meaninglessness. And yet, in human terms, it's all entirely meaningless. It's all entirely purposeless. So this is a very strange, paradoxical state of affairs. But every aspect of this state of affairs is strange and paradoxical when we contrast the human view of it, and there's any kind of a consensus reality view of it, with the actual event. The actual event is so unlikely in human terms. The most imaginative science fiction writer has not touched upon it. It couldn't be done. It could not be done. It's too far out. What's happening here is absolutely too far out. For the most whacked out, crazed, creative, psychotic poet to even do more than vaguely hint at it.
Peter, I had a lucid dream where I was, like what happens when I have a lucid dream is everything kind of recedes and people and circumstances cease insanely imposing themselves upon me. And then I felt, well, this is a lucid dream, so I want to see some action. I walked into a restaurant and everyone was just kind of ignoring me and sitting at their tables. And then it occurred to me, I have to make something happen. So I walked up to a table and I started trying to talk to a guy, and I perceived that he was some kind of a guru. He had like a glowing light in his head. And then he started saying stuff and it was all just gibberish. I thought, well, of course it's gibberish because this is just a dream. Like, how could he possibly give me anything or tell me anything? I'm just dreaming this whole thing up. And I guess that's even a curious contrast to like my experience now, or in here I'm always thinking like, what's Peter going to say? Like, it seemed, and there's an orientation of like looking, listening, feeling like engaged in it, and there's like meaningfulness in what you're saying, and like it's relevant, and it seems to be coming external. It's externally relevant. It's coming to me somehow, even though it's like light appearing in consciousness. It seems to be conveying a special importance about light appearing in consciousness, and I don't know. I was just wondering what you think about all that. Like,
well, I suggest you let yourself go lucid so that this is all gibberish, and then see what it looks like from that point of view.
Yeah, that sounds good. So, yeah, I haven't figured out the lever yet to let myself go that way in this.
You will.
All right. I'm very curious to see what it's like.
It's so unfortunate you didn't memorize the gibberish that was told you in the dream, because it was no doubt the highest truth. Because of course gibberish is gibberish, but it's not gibberish. That's one of the interesting aspects of reality, is that in human terms things are this or that, things can be mutually exclusive, whereas in reality everything is both and. So gibberish is profound meaningfulness, and profound meaningfulness is gibberish with no either or whatsoever. There's an ultimate and intimate simultaneity and integrity of every possible aspect of anything in what it is inherently, which of course is unexpressible.
In my experience, it's a question from the internet. In my experience, seeing comes in waves. I go from getting a sense of what this is to being lost in thought again and again. Is there a point where things might get a bit more stable?
No. Because again, when we're in a human frame of reference, seeing and then being lost in thought appear to be two different things, but in actuality they're one and the same. And this becomes clear without ever settling down. You will come to a point where you will stop holding these as two different events, And you will see that they are just the same event that can look like anything. It can look like clarity, it can look like seeing, it can look like being lost in confusion, it can look like being lost in thought, it can look like thinking you're a human being in a body, it can look like realizing you're a transcendental divinity that is bigger than hyperspace. And all of these are just versions of the same thing. There's no exclusivity there. There's no either or. They're all just different ways that this can appear to be. And it never settles down, it never stabilizes. But it never departs from what it is, so in a profound sense it is absolute and ultimate stability. One simple way to put it, it's always exactly what it is, but it can look like absolutely anything. These kinds of notions are part of the tainting that we get from all these spiritual teachings that recommend, calm your mind, or find clarity, or find peace, or find stability, or, find equipoise, or find a lasting compassion for all sentient beings, or this, that, or the other, as if there's some kind of a stable condition that you do not already have that you could somehow achieve or contrive that would be to your advantage. This is all complete hogwash. It's entirely untrue. It's just not the case. Your condition is already reality itself. And what does reality look like? Well, you know what it looks like. It looks like what it always looks like, anything. What's reality ever looked like in your life? It's what you've been seeing, nothing but reality, so you're very familiar with what it looks like. And has there ever been any consistency? Has there ever been any stability? Has there ever been any predictability? Has there ever been any graspability? Have you ever been able to figure out even vaguely what's going on? We're always in this condition where, we generally have the urgent arrogance to have a slight pretense of, I know what's happening, I know who I am, I know what I'm doing, it's this, that, and the other. But we know, deep down inside, we know we're faking it. We know we don't have a clue what anything is. And typically we're very desperate about that, which generates all of this defensiveness and urgency and sort of the pain of the horror of being a human being. It feels so good to let go. It feels so good to go to sleep. It feels so good to get high or get stoned or get drunk or whatever, because you let go of all that. You let go of all that pretense, of that holding, of that having to maintain this absurd mask that you have any integrity at all, that you have any idea whatsoever what you are or what's going on, which we all know we don't. We've never known.
Yeah, thank you for what you just said there about the not knowing thing again, because I'm in a situation where the not knowing seems to be more extremely, kind of weird feeling, but I'm having some heart operation tomorrow.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, and it might lead to some further operation. They might decide to proceed and try to fix it if it needs fixing, but I don't really know how any of that is going to work out, of course.
They don't either.
Yeah, I'm beginning to get a sense of that as I talk to them.
It's an interesting place to be, isn't it?
Very. And it's a lot of confusion, mainly confusion. And I sometimes am kind of scared and panicky about it, but actually that goes away rather rapidly, because I think, how can I be scared or panicked, because I don't know what's going to happen anyway?
Yeah. You can only be scared of the fantasy of what you're afraid of, and you don't know that that's going to occur. In fact, you can be certain that your fantasy is not going to occur, because reality always transcends your fantasies. What happens is always something other than what you expect, right? You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so in that unknowing, there's actually a big release. There's actually a big load off. You don't need to be afraid of it, because it'll take care of itself. Whatever happens, you'll be there and it'll be happening, and it's too late then. But it's always too late, because it's always now, and now is already for what's foreshadowed for something, In other words, it's too late to reinvent now, because it's already happened.
Yeah.
And now is a complete surprise. You don't know what's going to happen now. You don't know the next word I'm going to say. You don't know the next thought you're going to think. You don't know the next, thing someone else is going to do. You don't know the next accident that's going to happen. It's surprising. Now is always surprising, and it's too late to re-engineer it. And you certainly can't re-engineer the past, and you can't control the future. Right?
Right.
So, oh my God, this is just wide open. But that's kind of interesting in a way. It's real. It's not pretend. It's not this bullshit of, I've got it down. Everything's going to be fine. Nothing's going to be fine. Everything's just going to be a big, I don't know.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you'll be there, and it'll be taking care of itself, and it'll be too late to second guess it anyway. You can't second guess the present moment, because it's already underway, right? I mean, there's no brakes at the present moment. It's not like there's a brakes, you can put on the brakes and slow it down, and can you? I mean, It's too late. So the chain of events is already eventing, right? And it's a complete surprise. It's anybody's guess what's going to happen, and all guesses will be wrong, because what actually happens is always entirely unpredictable and unexpected. And that turns out to be okay, because that's how it is. That's how it's always been. It's never been other than that. And it's self-sufficient. It does itself, right? The present moment, it's not falling apart. It's here. It's happening. Everything is doing what it's doing. And there's an okayness there. It's not a rational okayness, but it's the actual okayness of, this is as it is, and how could it be otherwise? It never has been otherwise. It never will be otherwise. And, that turns out to be pretty darn okay. But it's not rational, and it's not predictable, and it's not a safe okayness. It's the real okayness. The okayness of I don't know. And I've never known, right? Have you ever known what's going to happen?
I don't think so. Maybe a little bit.
But even when you know what's going to happen in general terms, the specifics are always surprising. They always deviate. They're never exactly, right?
Yeah.
Well, I wish you luck.
Thank you very much.
But what that means is also unknown. Who knows what's going to be lucky?
What's lucky? Yeah, right. Yeah. Thank you.
I asked this question before. I'm going to ask you again. Could you explain what is samadhi?
No. The simplest and truest answer is this is samadhi. Samadhi is inconceivable transcendental intelligence seeing itself, which is what is always happening. And you could say in more practical terms, samadhi consists of recognizing the fact that that is what's always happening. But whether you recognize it or not, that is what's always happening. So recognizing it doesn't actually change the event. So this is samadhi. This is a meditation vision. This is the revelation of absolute transcendence. Every instant is the revelation of infinity. The direct and immediate revelation, the shining forth of the infinite. And when you see that, it's dumbfounding. When you don't see that, it just seems like business as usual in life, and, well, it's Wednesday night, you know. But there's no difference between those two conditions. They're one and the same. So samadhi is the actual condition, and there's never actually anything else than the actual condition, of course. How could there be?
If someone teaching people to practice, like sitting practice to achieve samadhi, and goes deeper into the samadhi by just sit, what is your comment about that?
It's dangerous. It's liable to be misleading, because the person is liable to misidentify what the actuality of samadhi is, and identify samadhi with some deep condition of quiescence or unconsciousness or whatever. That certainly is samadhi, but so is talking to somebody or sitting on the toilet or going to sleep or drinking a beer. It's all the same. And so, you know, in practical terms, in spirituality, the operative factor is always the capacity of the people that are involved in the discourse. Because there is advice, there are many different kinds of advice that can be given, which are appropriate for people with different capacities of understanding, different capacities of function, different capacities of insight. And you're not doing anyone a favor to give them advice that is beyond their means, that they can't deal with, because it'll just confuse them. And a great deal of spiritual instruction is intended for people of lower capacity, which is fine. If you happen to be a person of lower capacity at a given moment, then by all means, if you get advice which is intended for you, that's, I guess, arguably a good thing. But it's not a true thing. It's not profound. And if you want the real truth, you're going to get a deep instruction which is very profound, and which many people arguably may not be able to take advantage of, because they might not have the capacity to engage with their experience that way, at that level of profundity, let's say, at any given point in time. Of course, there's nothing static about this. We all move in and out of various conditions of capacity at different times. And so that's all of these different spiritual instructions, which are very, very divergent. And it's not like, oh, they're all wrong except for this tiny little bit, which are pretty good. It's like, well, they're all useful instructions for the right person in the right situation. You know, for one person, it may be really good advice to take up sitting meditation and do a sitting practice and, you know, try to prolong, you know, quiescent mind or whatever, get insight and all these sorts of things. But there's also other advice which may actually be more profound, more efficient for those capable to avail themselves of it. If the best you can do is sitting meditation, by all means, do sitting meditation. It's good. It's fun. But it's not, for a person of higher capacity, it's not the most efficient way to experience what this is more profoundly. I mean, just as general advice, anything can be. So again, you know, all of this is it's very slippery. Trying to give advice or trying to give teachings is very, very slippery, because you can't do it in an unqualified way. You can't say, oh, this will lead to this, that will lead to that. It's not like that.
talking about getting into this unknown, it's happened to me a lot. Just all of a sudden, is just this. Is can't describe it.
And it's hard to describe a logical way you got there. Like if someone says, "Well, what should I do to get to that?" What do you say? You can't say. It's like it just happens. It happens in the most unexpected, because it's beyond your structure. It's unexpected. It's intrinsically unexpected. So the way to get there is unexpected, right? So how do you put yourself in unexpectedness? That's an interesting question. Try and find yourself doing something new, something you've never done. Or notice when you're doing something that you think you have done, notice that it's new and you've never done it in actuality. Or notice the way in which it's new. It's all these different tricks and subtle suggestions. But again, unless you can make the leap of have the capacity to see what it's talking about, it won't be very useful. But generally, genuine spiritual insight is a surprise, is unexpected, and you arrive at it through unexpected means. And it can be difficult to get the unexpected by following expectations, which is always the challenge with spiritual practices that are too closely laid out, because there's a lot of expectation there. So you're immersing yourself in a path of expectation to try to discover unexpectedness, which can be intrinsically confusing.
Well, although it's getting more and more, and its timing is kind of longer when I get into this unknown stuff, but it doesn't still doesn't getting deeper enough. So.
But see, that's part of the fantasy. Is there's deeper. Deeper is a known. The unknown, you can't tell if it's deep or not. And that's the true depth. The real deep, you can't tell if it's deep or not. If it doesn't seem deep enough, then you're approaching it shallowly. You understand? So when it's really deep, you don't know if it's deep. Is it deep? I don't know. That's when it's really deep, when you can't tell.
Yeah, I certainly have expectation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the trick, when you're with these kinds of experience, any expectation you bring to it is what makes shallowness. So if you think, I need to be deeper, then that expectation is what creates shallowness. If you didn't have that expectation, you wouldn't know if it's deep or not, and it's the ultimate depth. Because there's actually nothing deeper than anything else. It's always infinite depth. This is always absolute samadhi. Just this, exactly. Normalcy is the deepest samadhi. And there's nothing but normalcy. Sitting in meditation is normalcy. Having a conversation is normalcy. Eating dinner is normalcy. And it's all the most absolute deepest samadhi. Because it's absolute infinity meeting absolute infinity. Not as a concept, not in the abstract, but in actuality. What's experiencing your experience right now? What is seeing through your eyes? Is it finite? Can you find it? Does it have borders? Does it have an end? Does it have an edge? Does it have a top and a bottom? What's seeing your experience right now, right? It's infinite. You can't find it. And what's it seeing? Can you get a handle on exactly what you're experiencing? Can you make a list? Can you make an inventory that has everything on it? There's no way, right? It's just this astounding, inconceivable diversity of impressions, right? Constantly changing. There's no way you can wrap your head around it. So what's seeing your experience is infinity, And what's being seen is infinity. So this is infinity seeing infinity, and that is the very essence of samadhi. And there's never anything else happening. Never has been, never will be.
Thank you.
Can you suggest any ways to relax into the white light or unpatterned radiance?
Yes. The unpatterned radiance is one with the patterned radiance, and you've already relaxed into that. So just relax with what you are, which can even include non-relaxation is also relaxing into the radiance. So non-relaxing with the patterning is actually relaxing into the radiance, so you're good. You're good to go. You can check that one off your list.
The answer was ho ho.
Well, I would say more emaho, but yeah. But my answer was actually not facetious. It was very precise and quite inclusive. Although it's hopefully delightfully witty and entertaining as well.
This idea that normalcy is deep samadhi, he stole that one from me way back when. You know who this is?
Of course. I stole everything from you, Frank. I wouldn't be where I am today without you. Goes to show how much mileage you can get out of thievery and plagiarism. On the very first page of my website, if you happen to go to my website, there's a little blurb which talks about all this issue very pointedly. we define incompleteness, we define unenlightenment, we define partiality into existence, and once we define it into existence, we think we're stuck with it and we're looking for the solution to it, which we also define into existence. If you don't define this present moment, is it unenlightened? Is it enlightened? Is it partial? Is it complete? None of these notions even apply. It's just completely this. You know, anything else you say about it, you're having to invent, you're having to define into existence, and you can't prove it. You know, this is unenlightenment. Okay, prove it. Prove that it's unenlightenment. You know, this is incomplete. Prove that it's incomplete. You know. What's actually happening here is completely indeterminate, and that proves to be a very powerful condition because it's a condition of absolute undefinability. Which in practical terms means no problem. No worries, man.
Peter?
Yes.
Back here. Oh.
I like your start.
The question I want to ask you is what is consciousness? And I'll tell you what I mean by that. There's a sense that we have of being, I mean, in the kind of conventional, everyday use of the word, of being, sometimes we'll call it being awake or in the waking state. Mm-hmm. But there's a sense of dropping, either being asleep, or someone said they were going to be in surgery when you go under anesthetic, or mm-hmm. you go into these, sometimes you get into states where you're not aware uh-huh. of, and we call that being unconscious. But of course consciousness in the kind of bigger sense is always there, and there's a experience of it. So what is that thing that we call being conscious? It seems to be that it's connected in some way with what we call memory, that we have some sense of...
You're distinguishing being conscious as differentiated from consciousness? Or are you talking about you talked about consciousness as you just defined it earlier?
Yeah.
Which, yeah? The difference? Or?
I'm not sure I got the question. I'm talking about the consciousness of being like in the waking state.
Okay, yeah.
But of course there's times we're in the waking state where we're not really conscious too. But
isn't there? Interesting. Well, I suggest looking at the issue from a broader perspective first, and then we can see if the way in which it narrows down into different contexts. If I was pressed to define consciousness, I would define it as presence. Exactly what presence is turns out to be very slippery, but it's undeniable. You could define it, you could further elaborate that one-word definition. You could say the presence of experience. And even non-experience is, of course, the presence of experience. It's the presence of the experience of non-experience. So in that context, so relatively unconscious or less conscious conditions are presence of experience. Relatively more conscious conditions, states of consciousness, are the presence of experience. So what I would say about that is that it is, first of all, this presence is completely unanalyzable and ultimately unfindable, even though it's self-evident. You can't say what it is. It's essentially miraculous, or certainly mysterious, ungraspable, even though self-evident and completely obvious. So the way it looks to me is that this presence has the inherent miraculous ability to appear in different degrees of itself while always being itself. And I don't see any hard demarcation between these different degrees of itself. I think it's a sort of a continuous scale, and we arbitrarily define conscious and unconscious, depends on kind of where you want to draw the line, because as you've observed, of course, even in the waking state, we sort of drift in and out of varying degrees of presence, varying degrees of focus, varying degrees of sort of definition or clarity or various other conditions. And we may be used to having a certain threshold that we define as, now I'm, conscious, i.e. waking condition, and now I'm less conscious or unconscious, i.e. something else. But to me, it's a continuum, and it's kind of arbitrary where to draw the line. So I just take it as it's intrinsic in this presence that it can appear with arbitrary degrees of itself while always being ultimately and fundamentally itself.
So it's ultimately just a kind of arbitrary prejudice or something that we tend to, because we seem to think of that as being more real in some way.
Yeah, well, that's exactly, that's the kind of it's a kind of an indicator of the kind of problems that we encounter in simplistically approaching spirituality. Because if you go to sort of New Age circles, there's you'll hear a conversation like, oh, let's be more present, be more conscious, let's be conscious about this, as if that was somehow a superior condition. I don't think so. I think that presence is reality, and it comes in an infinite range of gradations and flavors. But it never departs from itself. It's never more real than itself. It's never less real than itself. Reality under anesthesia is not unreality. Reality, when you're wide awake and present and focused and on the edge, is not more reality in actual fact. It can be argued that it's different sorts of, different sorts of designatable qualities present, at least in matter of degrees. But you can't really pin down what any of those are, so the whole thing sort of turns into a mirage at a certain point. And it self-evidently kind of seems to be the case, but when you try to sort it out or get to the bottom line, you sort of end up scratching your head because, what are these qualities that are, they're sort of self-evident that these qualities are there, but, you try and pin them down, you try and define them, you try and find them, you try and delineate them, and, you're kind of, you may as well be under anesthesia for all the good it does you. And when you're under anesthesia, are there no qualities present? I don't think so. I think there's a profound range of qualities present. They're just very subtle. But the qualities that are present when you're focused front and center and very present, are also very subtle. They're sort of a little more arguably in your face subtle, but is that really true? I mean, anesthesia, the state of anesthesia is pretty in your face in a profound way. I mean, if you've ever been put out, it's a bizarre experience relative to the waking condition. But in bottom line, is it real? Is it really any less real? Is it any less in your face? Is it any less dimensional? And if you try to isolate the ways in which it's different, you end up in a whole lot of murkiness, and a whole lot of fuzziness, and a whole lot of, sort of falling back on empiricism of, well, it's obviously different. Yeah, sure, it's obviously different, but what does that mean? How does that happen? And again, it's mysterious. Well, okay, yeah, I agree, it's mysterious. And so, but as soon as you go to it's mysterious, you're basically saying, I don't have a clue what's going on, which is the fact. And that's an okay fact because it is the fact, it's true. But you don't have any more or less of a clue about the waking condition than you do about less waking conditions or about, deep anesthesia. They're all equally mysterious, and in terms on a value scale, mystery equals mystery. So you can't really say one is more anything than the other when you can't really say what either of them actually are. I mean, we come up against this again and again, that it's so explicit that things are the way they are, but then we have a subtle thinking we know what that is in some sense, meaningful, in some sense that has some teeth to it, right? But as soon as you really look and see if that's really true, you're going to find that you don't. You're going to find that, well, this is self-evident, and you can't really say anything more than that about it, really, because you're trying to find these things, and it starts getting slipperier and slipperier and weirder, and you're just like, unless you're comfortable with falling back on just, sophistry, and then you can just start spitting out boilerplate and pretending you're justifying and explaining something, but it's bullshit. It's not really honest. It's not really addressing what is actually present in the way that it is present, which is ultimately and always and explicitly mysterious. The most explicit aspects of experience are mysterious, which means that we're kind of up the creek, because if the most obvious aspects are mysterious, then the less obvious aspects aren't going to likely to be many less mysterious. So, right? I mean, there is, and this presence is fascinating because it's an undeniable fact. But having said that, it's like, well, prove it or demonstrate it or define it or say anything at all intelligent about it, and all of a sudden, all the air's going out of your argument. It's like, strange state of affairs.
Thank you.
Thanks for what?
The mystery.
So, whether someone's a pre-verbal, say, baby, or a hardened mathematician, or a CEO, accountant, or a seeker, or a practitioner, or someone who thinks they have samadhi, what's really separating all of us from this, then, well, it's available to any of those.
Yeah.
It's here.
Yes. Because all of those conditions actually, of course, consist of this. So, of course, it's available.
Yeah, I mean, so the problem then is just, the amount of, well, why aren't all of those just always aware then of this?
No, but this is a very good question, and it's actually the greatest spiritual mystery, which is, how can this astounding, miraculous consciousness / presence / whatever it is become so confused about itself? How can it, seeing nothing other than itself, still not recognize itself? And then how can it come to recognize itself?
Well, it's
demonstrably that seems to occur.
Yeah.
And how does it happen? How can it happen?
And it does it in so many different ways.
Yeah,
it's like, I just named off 4 or 5 different examples of how it does it, or how that can happen.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? You know, I mean, we can sort of deconstruct some of the modes through which this seems to come into being. But again, when you look closer, it ultimately is mysterious. So even having deconstructed some of them, we still end up basically kind of scratching our heads. So you can just jump to the finish line and say, it's the damnedest thing.
Say what?
It's the damnedest thing.
Oh, yeah.
Or you can talk about how it appears to itself in infinite differentiation, but is capable of seeing itself as partially differentiated. In other words, finding sets within the infinite differentiation so that it can start seeing these sets as if they were entities. In other words, classifying groupings of differentiation. For example, every pixel, let's say, assuming it was pixelated, which it isn't actually, every pixel of what you're seeing right now is a different color. You're not seeing, you look at that wall, which supposedly is just painted the same color, but in actual fact, due to lighting conditions, variations in the paint, variations in your eyes, variations in your experiencing, every single tiniest bit of every bit of that wall you're looking at is actually a slightly different color, experientially, right? So that's the fact that wall is not one color, it's an infinite range of colors. And yet, the consciousness can effortlessly take that range of colors and sum it up as a group, as a set, as a range, and say, well, that range is similar enough to itself that I'm going to say that it's approximately the same color. And this is a clear example of exactly what consciousness does, or seems to do, let's say, right? So the walls all of a sudden are two colors. The trim is one color and the walls are another color. Whereas experientially, they're literally an infinite spectrum of colors. Literally. Every single pixel of your vision is a different color from every other pixel, period. Every pixel. There's no two that are exactly the same, right? Same with sound, obviously all experience is similar. So consciousness has this property of taking these vast, absolute differentiated fields and clumping them down into groups or sets that are defined by consciousness as being essentially similar. In other words, it ignores the vast range and assumes or defines that they're actually the same. So it takes a field of infinite data and ends up with a field of finite data. Because by doing that, I can say, well, how many colors are in my field of vision? Well, let's say 60, 70, 80, 90, right? By that method, I can do that. The walls are two colors, the blue jeans are, however many pairs there are here, they're each one color. The T-shirts are each kind of one color, and, people's faces are kind of few shades, None of which is true, none of which is actually accurate, but the consciousness can do that effortlessly and can rest in that mode without argument, without too much internal tension. So in this way, infinity, an actual present infinity, is turned into a conceptual, finite group of things, of fields of presence, which can then be subdefined as entities and functional entities and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden you can have people in a room, in chairs, and a floor, and carpet, rather than just an infinite field of absolutely differentiated pixels.
So the concept, if you can get beyond the concept and see how consciousness has, or feel it, or just sort of experience it, how it's broken things down into the actual set, not the concept of the set, but the set itself, or the pattern, or
and that the set exists in a fundamental underlying reality which transcends it.
Right.
In other words, I say the wall's all one color is a set which exists as an overlay over the actual presence of a field of infinite colors, infinite shades. So that hasn't actually gone anywhere. The infinity is present, even as it's being defined as a finiteness, as a simplicity.
So if you can somehow see the pattern, or or feel it, whatever, not as a concept, but as what consciousness is doing.
Yeah, it's a bona fide mode. It's an exercise of an astounding intelligence that spontaneously can function in this mode. It's like this amazing subroutine of the inherent intelligence that can effortlessly spit it. You don't need it takes no effort. You don't need to walk into a room and take time out to pull the wall color together. It's just you glance at it and you just bang. You just hold it to be what it the walls are a neutral brown. Okay, cool, neutral brown. Yeah.
Just walking into a room, I'm doing that already.
But it happens in real time. There's no time lag.
Right.
I mean, this shows the astounding power of this inherent intelligence that consciousness functions as. That it can do all this without breaking its stride, effortlessly. You can walk into a room and in one glance you see everything that's there to be seen. And you may have to take a minute to bother to designate it, but you've already seen it. You've already classified it unconsciously or directly in terms of, there's people in the room, there's a room in the room, there's a table, there's chairs, blah, 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 blah. And before you've said that, you already know that. You're already holding that to be the case just by your direct initial experience. And that's how fast it happens. This is a very powerful functioning that occurs. But noticing that it occurs, you can then notice that it occurs in a context which transcends it, which is other than it, which is the presence of a naked infinity, which is the fact that your actual sensory information is infinitely differentiated, is not actually clumped into the sets that this mode of thinking classifies it as. Yeah, we have just enough time for...
Seems two different people want to know this. It is said that in reality nothing exists. What does this mean? Nothing exists as a separate thing, but experience does exist, right? Could you please talk about this?
Yes, this is a good question. No thing exists. Even experience doesn't exist because experience is being held as a thing. Something is as it is to the extent that it is. In other words, this condition is what it is, but you can't find it, you can't define it, you can't delineate it, you can't get a handle on it. So even though it is what it is, it's not anything in particular. And you can't even say whether it exists or not. Does the dream exist? Well, the dream appears. Is there anything that's there when you're dreaming? No. Consciousness is there, but is consciousness a thing? Is consciousness actually present? Consciousness is the possibility of perceiving experience, and apparently, like in a dream, the self evident projection of experience. But there doesn't need to be anything there, and maybe consciousness isn't a thing, or what? Because you can't find it. It's self-transcendent. It's unanalyzable. It's ungraspable. So there are no things. Experience is here, but having said that, I haven't said that anything, because what experience is a big question mark. So, what there is a question mark, and you can't even be sure there's a question mark. And in that condition, there's kind of no thing, which is not a nihilism, because that would be something. It's more elusive even than nothing. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah. So you could almost say that because there's no stagnation, everything. I mean, our experience itself is a flow. Yeah. In that very recognition and experiencing of that in reality, you clearly see that there is no thing.
Yeah,
because
sure.
Nothing lasts long enough to be anything.
Yeah. And
yet everything comes through.
And even saying it's a flow, as evocative as it is, you can't find what's flowing, and you can't find an actual flow. It's meaningful to say it's a flow, but then you can't actually find a flow. So having said it's a flow, you aren't really left with anything.
Right.
Because you can't find the flow.
It's the same thing as saying that it's
the whole
nothing
thing
or it's anything.
It's endlessly slippery. It vanishes up its own asshole, to use a very poetic image. It doesn't, you go looking for it, and the it you started looking for is unfindable. So, And what's looking for it is unfindable, so the whole thing is just turns out to be curiouser and curiouser, in the words of Lewis Carroll. Anyway, one more quick one.
It's a follow-up. If there is no consciousness of experience, is there experience?
Well, that's the point. Is it meaningful to say there is consciousness of experience? Is it meaningful to say there could be no consciousness of experience? Because we don't know what consciousness is, and we don't know what experience is, and yet they are ubiquitous. There's never non-consciousness. There's never non-experience. So again, the question is it leaves you hanging. It's unanswerable. And on that note, it's quitting time. No clock on the wall says it's time to go. So I wish you all a happy hunting.
If you weren't able to put something in the basket on the way in, if you could on your way out, so we can continue to have these events at the Hillside Club.
If you could meet your donation, it would help, just because there are actual expenses that have to be met in terms of this hall paying for itself and stuff. Thanks so much.